impressive. So
We came for the Exodus.
I hope you don't walk out. But the great news is that this morning at 7:30, my 5-year-old granddaughter caught her first muskie in finding.
Bravo.
Better than that, her big brother was in the boat with us, and she's been going nanny, nanny, nanny. So that's a good day for me, and I hope it's a good day for you. Glad to have Wayne Pyle here. If you've met him, only you two haven't met him. Wayne's been a long time city manager, city administrator, city boss for a long time, and has asked guest speakers to come in and talk and help us out so that we can all ask questions. He can give us some answers. With that much of an introduction, I'll turn it to you, Wayne. You can do the intro.
All right.
And it's 6 o'clock.
Okay. Nick, do you want me to give you any time between?
Yeah, let me just, you guys have heard this so many times that honestly, wait, I've got to get this to stop doing what it's doing. All right, so you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that if this will let me. Oh, this is wonderful. Let's see, where's my mouse? Okay, we're here. We got 2 more to go after this, so 3 total. The forms of government options is going to be a very important meeting, so we hope you either come to that or listen to the recording, because there are a couple of things that are going to be on the ballot. Not only the type of city government, but there's some additional questions or options that are going to come up on the ballot. So we're reviewing the language. We want to educate you as to what those things mean. And we will share all that with you at that meeting. Again, we have a website. We record these. This is under recording right now. And you can go see these afterwards. And I will turn it back to Wayne.
Okay, thank you, Nick. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gary. And Mr. Crane, I've known as long as I was in municipal government. That's maybe not quite true. We may not have met when I worked for Municipal, but certainly as soon as I went over to West Valley, I started working with Gary. He's a long time attorney in the field, but that's not really the main reason why I asked him to come and speak with us on this particular topic tonight. He, as long as I have known him, has been at the forefront and in the thick of any of these topics that we've been talked about in some of the other sessions, but haven't concentrated on as a subject, which we're going to tonight. And what I mean by that is like, okay, let's assume the vote passes, you become a city, you incorporate. We're not just living in our own little vacuum here, right? You got to work with the state, you got to work with planning entities, you got to work with the federal government, you got to work with entities that some of us may not have ever really heard of before, like Wasatch Front Regional Council, who's responsible for doing planning functions for transportation improvements across the state, or the League of Cities and Towns, which some of you may have heard more of, but they're an invaluable resource for cities to link to the other branches of government and other municipal officials here in the state. Also lobbying or grants application or those sorts of things. Those are all things that I've known Gary to be involved with and to excel at. He's kind of one of my heroes in that realm. All the years that I worked in municipal government. So we're very lucky to have him here tonight. He's going to talk to you about some of those things. I kind of call this, I was telling Cheryl over here, I call this the sleeper session. And by that, I don't mean you're all going to fall asleep while we're talking here. I mean, think of this like, for any of you who used to like the hot rod your cars when you were kids like I did, this is like the 69 Chevy Nova with 4 doors that you're driving down State Street and you're not expecting anything out of it. But under the hood, somebody's dumped a 427 big block in it with a supercharger on it. That's literally the kind of difference that these sorts of external relations kinds of efforts can bring a city that most places, especially in the smaller end of the spectrum, don't really know about or invest in terms of either time or money. So I really thought this would be a topic that would be of great interest for people that are thinking about what, okay, why would we incorporate? What do we get out of that? How is that better or different than what the county's doing? So with that, I'm going to introduce and turn it over to Mr. Gary Crane. Does it say Esquire on here? I know he is. So
So, and Mark will verify that, but I actually did graduate from municipal and wasn't an attorney, so we've known each other for quite a while.
Can I make one request that you stand close-ish to this? Because
Sure.
that's our microphone for the folks online.
My best side is this one right here.
Oh,
You
well.
got it.
Well, it's a pleasure to be able to be with you tonight. When Wayne asked if I would come and talk a little bit about externalities, I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, and he explained the whole incorporation process that you guys have gone through so far and everything that you've done to prepare. And I just have got to compliment you. This is probably one of the best organized incorporations that I've seen, which congratulations to you, because that usually is enough. Way to go. Way to go. I remember years ago, I remember years ago as a new attorney in West Valley City. That's where I started, was in West Valley City. They put me on a typing table and said, this is your desk. That's all we had. And we were in a warehouse in West Valley City. And that's where I started. But I remember as a new attorney getting a call from somebody in Mountain Green. And I remember his name was John. I don't remember his last name. This is 40 years ago, right? And John said, hey, Gary, I understand that you're into land use and that you understand incorporation and annexation and that type of thing. Would you give me some information on how to incorporate Mountain Green? And I said, well, where's Mountain Green? And he told me where Mountain Green was. And I said, well, that sounds like an ideal little community to incorporate because it's enough distance from the county that it really doesn't receive the attention. And he explained how it didn't receive the attention in great detail. But I've got to tell you, it's 40 years later and Mountain Green is not incorporated. And Mountain Green looks very much other than the subdivision that's at the top there and some things that are moving and shaking, but they've been moving and shaking for 40 years without actually moving and shaking because nothing has happened for 40 years. It looks virtually the same. And I keep thinking if 40 years ago, somebody would have continued forward with the attempts to incorporate, that you would probably have an interchange at Mountain Green because there has been money available over the years for that. But guess what? It's gone to other projects. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. But it's gone to other projects in the state. And I can tell you, all you got to do is drive through Utah County to understand where a lot of the money has gone in the state of Utah. You go through Utah County and that was one of the first areas where they improved I-15 and the off-ramps. And I still remember the off-ramp to nowhere down in Utah County. It kind of went into where the chicken farm was. You probably remember that because you could smell it every time you went past it, right? And it disappeared. And now there's growth, there's development. Not in Mountain Green, not yet. And hopefully there will be, but it's actually being driven by private business now. That's what it's being driven by. And unfortunately, I think the control that Mountain Green has, for the folks in Mountain Green, and this is somebody's going to come after me for this. I know they will because I'm Morgan City attorney right now. And I know somebody's going to criticize the fact that I said this, but Mountain Green could be a totally different place if they would have incorporated and seen the ability to incorporate years ago. So a little bit of my background. I started with West Valley City. I ended up in being city attorney for Layton City for 30 years. I was with West Valley for about seven years, roughly 7-8 years. And I've also been city attorney for Morgan since 1997. So they've had me around for a long time. I don't think they really realize I'm still there, but I'm still in Morgan. And during that period of time, I've had the opportunity of observing a number of different incorporations. West Valley incorporated just a couple of years before I actually got there. And so they were still trying to finagle through and move through all of the difficulties that you experience in the years following incorporation. It's not easy. You know that. You already know that because of putting it together. It's not an easy process. But once it's together, it begins to come together and take form. And in the subsequent years, you'll notice that there's a real difference in the area that you incorporated versus the areas that are not incorporated. You'll notice a difference, a visible difference in those areas. Taylorsville was another one that incorporated afterwards. And gradually they grew from, I think they had a slot in a commercial center, a strip center. And that's where they started. And I remember the first mayor of Taylorsville, which we won't talk about, Wayne and I were referring to that, but the second mayor of Taylorsville was really a go-getter. She put together a lot of the contracts and agreements with the county for services, and they began to grow. And today, Taylorsville is a full-blown city. They provide their services. They still contract for some of the services. Now, I'm also going to tell you two things I want to cover tonight. And in the half an hour that Wayne's given me, now 20 minutes. First thing is externalities. The things external to everything you've been going through has kind of been a process and a procedural, dealing with procedural issues. You've also dealt with land use. Nicole was here. She's excellent. She's fantastic. She dealt with the land use and the control of your land use up here, which is one of the reasons that you want to incorporate. But I want to talk about some other externalities that you may not have considered that I think ought to be high on the priority list for anybody that's incorporating and wants to maintain control of the area that they're incorporating. In other words, as a community, you want a certain theme, you want to control that theme, you want to make sure that it's set up so that you can do that and that you have the ability to do that. And then the other thing I want to talk about is the internalities of the whole thing. And maybe I'll start with the internalities. I realize it wasn't on the banner, okay? But here's an internality lesson that I learned the hard way. A number of years ago, Mel Brown, some of you may remember Mel, he's from Camas area, he's a legislator. Mel decided that, you know what, it wouldn't be a bad idea to allow developers to incorporate their own towns or cities. Some of you might remember that. Okay, there were three towns that were incorporated. One was Hideout. All of you familiar with that on the Jordanelle Reservoir. Another one was Ruby's Inn. And another one was Liberty up in the Park City area. And so those three incorporated, and they were incorporated by developers. I helped incorporate Hideout, the town of Hideout. However, at that time, the developer could also be the mayor. Mm. And now, okay, picture this, right? The mayor incorporates all of his own property as a developer. He has his own attorney draft the development agreement for the property within the city. And anybody else that moves in is subject to whatever the mayor, and most of them were his family members on the council, by the way. And the council members actually dictated. And so new development coming in had an awful time. They also set up what's called a special service area, where they actually taxed their own properties as they developed. They taxed each of their own homes, and that paid for all the infrastructure. So it was a sweet deal for development, but it was totally development oriented, completely development oriented. And the reason I tell you that is because years later, I made a lot of good money mediating the agreements that were reached between the mayor and the city after the people began to take over and other people began to run for mayor and council and began to say, wait a second, this is not what we want it to look like. We want it to look like this. And we want this theme to exist up here in Hideout. We want this to happen. And so what ended up happening was that they to this day are in fights over what this area ought to look like, or whether this area ought to have this density, or whether that needs to have that. So I guess the point I'm making is that was kind of an odd thing. That didn't exist for very many years. In fact, they shut it down the next year. That was the following year. And there were only 3 cities. Ruby's Inn worked because they were all family, right? But Hideout did not work. And I don't think Liberty worked real well either. But it has grown and it has changed. And you've got independent people that sit on the council and are there right now. The reason I stress this is because as you consider your incorporation, consider the community as a whole and consider those that will run for mayor, for council, because you want the right people to run. You want people that represent your interests. That's the whole reason for your incorporation, is to make sure that people that represent your interests run here in, what do we call it, Eden Valley?
Ogden Valley.
Ogden Valley? Okay, we don't know yet. I'll name it tonight. But yes, so you need people that represent your interests in those positions. What happens when, and I do know a couple of jurisdictions that have actually incorporated, and then nobody wanted to run for mayor and council. And so guess who came in? The developers came in, and they ran for council, and they ran for mayor. And that was a major problem. That was major. It set up the same problem that I had a night out. Exactly the same problem. So whatever you do, as you put this thing together and as you think about it, make sure you think about who would like to run, who represents your interests. Make sure you have a solid base of individuals that would love to participate in government. And it's fun. It's a great experience. It's not scary. It's a good thing. It really is a good thing. So that's number one, is that's the internalities piece. The externalities piece, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. And one of them occurred just this last year. So I'm up at the legislature, and I got to give you my background. I'm a lobbyist for Layton City. I lobby for Layton City every year as their attorney. I go up there. I've done it. I've lobbied since Paul Morris in West Valley City taught me how to do it. I go up on the hill and I spend 45 days in that place on the hill. And, you hear all about Washington, D.C. and how things work there. This is a mini Washington, D.C. up there. It really, truly is. I'm not just blowing smoke, but it's very, very much that way. So I go into one particular legislator, and this particular legislator had a problem in Layton, and it was a water problem in Layton. And this is how detailed it gets, or ticky-tacky it gets. This person had a water problem. His mother was still on flood irrigation, and she wanted to be on pressurized irrigation. And so I went in and I said, can we get some money to maybe work on a pressurized system? And this legislator says, well, I think we can get you $2 million to work on this pressurized system for this private pressurized company so that we could take them off of flood irrigation. And I said, fantastic. Free money is, wish I could get a percentage of it, but free money up at the state is great. It's awesome. And so they gave us $2 million. Now, subsequent to that, our engineer in Layton City did an analysis, and it was going to cost us $15 million to do what we needed to do to connect our 3 dams up. We had 3 dams in Layton City. We had to connect those 3 dams up so that we could equalize the water and use the water out west so that we could free up this water that was being flood irrigating about 14 properties is all. And so it was a lot bigger expense than what I anticipated. So I go back up to the legislature and I go to this legislator, and we have this big meeting, and we sit there and we said, it's going to cost another, Layton has $7 million. It's going to cost another $8 million for Layton City to accomplish this project. And I said, well, and he says, as long as we can get these 14 owners off of flood irrigation, I think I might be able to swing it for you. $8 million. $8 million in the state budget. Okay. And so we walk out of the room, and as we walked into the hallway, I had a lobbyist who was in that same meeting with me come up to me and he goes, Gary, for $100,000, I'll get you that $8 million that you need. And I looked at him and I said, well, let me think about it. Thank you very much, but let me think about it. And sure enough, he could get the $8 million. He had the connections with people in the departments that would be managing the $8 million. He had connections with the legislators that would be funding the $8 million. And I beat him down to 50,000. All right, just to lobby that one issue. And today, Layton City has 3 of its dams being connected because we got the $8 million and we got the $2 million. And we got it because we knew how to work the system up on the hill. I'm just telling you that there's an external system out there. Once you become a body, which is a municipal body of whatever you decide to become, whatever form of government you decide on, you become an entity. That entity has the capability of hiring lobbyists or employing individuals who know how to work with people on the Hill. Now, I don't just work with lobbyists. In fact, they're kind of the distasteful group. I used to say, I just need to know, there's all those people up on the Hill, there's 175 registered politicians and 29 in the Senate. Anyway, I used to say every year that I've gone up there for 40 years, I said, I just need to know 9 people. And literally I could count the 9 people I needed to know in order to get what I needed done for Layton City done. That's an externality that you don't even think about as you sit out here in the valley. It's a beautiful valley, but all that's happening up on the hill and you have no connection to it except through the county right now. But you can develop those connections, okay, once you become an incorporated entity. And you gain power as an incorporated entity to be able to demand some of those things. League of Cities and Towns. You become a part of the League of Cities and Towns. They are the strongest lobbyists on the Hill. Even then, though, going back, Wayne and I were talking earlier about the fact that if you don't fill the void with good people, with people who represent your interests, that the void's going to be filled. Well, up on the Hill, there was a void. And over my time up at the legislature, that void was filled. I think 1/3 of the legislators have something to do with real estate or something to do with development. And they have a strong, strong influence up on the Hill. Counter to that are the cities, the League of Cities and Towns. And you become a part of that. And you lobby up on the Hill as elected officials. You'll appear at hearings. You'll send in emails to your legislators. And now, because you happen to be blank, whatever the city is, blank city, called Ogden Valley City, or whatever you want to call it. But because you are an elected official with that group, you now have impact. You now have power. You now have control. They listen to you. Your legislators from this, that represent this valley, listen to you. And I was up there I was introduced to the legislature in 1985, maybe 86. I've been up there since then for 45 days every single year, working with the league on issues. And I have noticed I can go up there and I can knock on their doors and they go, "Hi, Gary, how are you? Yeah, we know you. We know you want money. We know you want this." But when my mayor goes up there or when my council person goes up there, they listen to that council person. They listen to that mayor. And I've seen them in public hearings actually listen to people. Now, public hearings are another thing. Everything that happens on the Hill generally happens outside of those meetings that you see, the public hearings that you see. Before they go in there, they've got a pretty good idea of how they're going to vote. I can tell you that. But they listen to the elected officials that are online or sitting there in the audience wanting to speak. They don't listen to guys like me. They'll give me 1 minute, Gary, and then you got to get out of here. But they'll listen to my mayor and they'll listen to my council people. And once you become a city, they listen to you. They'll listen to you. And that's important because in the last couple of years, the legislature have made more inroads into municipal power, the powers of municipalities, than any time that I've ever seen. They have controlled and set standards for what you can control when it comes to the way houses look, the way homes look. They've tried to control densities. Last year, trying to make the minimum density in every jurisdiction has to be 6,000 square foot lots. That was last year. They tried to mandate that. And through the League of Cities and Towns, through the mayors, they call it the League Army that gets together. And every mayor that contacts a legislator, they listen to the mayors. And so last year that did not make it. That did not make it through. But we got a lot more of that coming. And so lobbying up on the Hill is probably one of the most important things, the externalities that you can actually participate in and become familiar. I can tell you some of the projects that we've done. The flyover in Layton, $9 million, right? $9 million for the flyover. Went into a legislator one day and I said, we need a flyover right about where your hotel is.
What's a flyover?
It's a road that goes over the freeway, but has no access to the freeway. And it's right over near the theaters there, if you've ever seen that. We got the $9 million that year for that. Another one was the South Layton off-ramp. Where do you think the money came from for that? Lobby. We hired a lobbyist every once in a while. This is the importance, is that there are lobbyists up there who specialize in different areas. And you get to know who they are. And I'm going to tell you this. I know you're a small community and you will be a small community. But the lobbying community, when you find a project that you need to have done, is a very, very worthwhile investment. And so even though I have lobbied up there for 40 years, I was not an expert in where the transportation money was. And I knew somebody up there who was an expert in knowing where the transportation money was hidden. And the next thing I know, we got the money for the South Layton off-ramp. We got it ahead of Syracuse, who, and it's a funny story the way we did that. Syracuse wanted 193 to go all the way out west to Syracuse, and they wanted the money that year. And I happened to be lobbying for Layton, who wanted our off-ramp that same year. And we had a lobbyist who thought a lot of himself, let me put it that way. And he was coming out of the senator's office, the good senator's office, who had promised us the money. And the senator had told me earlier that day that money was probably going to go to Syracuse. And I was not happy with that, so I was there to talk to him. This lobbyist came out of the office and said to me, he said, Gary, for $60,000, I'll get you prioritized higher on the list. And I looked at him and said, okay, let me think about that. And so I walked in afterwards and I said, Senator, he just promised to get me moved up on the list if I pay him $60,000. Should I do it? He went ballistic. And we got our off-ramp a year before Syracuse got their road to the west. You know, it's interesting because you laugh and you smile about these things, but I've got to tell you that they're real. That some of the things that we do up there, we had a person in Layton who had a bunch of shares of M&I Water, municipal and industrial water. But he could, a city is the only, a city is the only one that could use that water. And he had no way of getting the water. The city had no way of getting the water to, it had not been used for years and years. And so because it has not been used for years and years, it was probably forfeited, right? We went up to the Hill and we passed a law that year, along with a number of other water laws. It's called the Lazarus Clause. Now, this is just a little thing, right? But it said that if you use water for 15 years after it's not been used, that it becomes alive again. Those shares become alive again. Those interests become alive again. So I went to this property owner and I said, for $26,000, I'll buy all of the water that's in the ground that you can't get out because you're not a municipality. And then I went up onto the Hill. It wasn't just me, it was a number of us that went up and we lobbied and we put into place the Lazarus Clause. And we figured that Layton City had used excess water at several of our wells, enough to actually compensate for all the water in the ground. And so they counted that as being used for the last 15 years after we passed the law. And we got about $9 million worth of water out of that one, just that one transaction. What I'm telling you, the reason I'm telling you these things is because it's fun. This is all available to you up on the hill. This is all available through lobbyists. You think this is bad? Washington is infinitely worse. It is infinitely worse, and it's not really bad. It just means that you have to be present to win. That's all it is, that you have to have a presence up on the hill. Generally, that presence is acceptable through the League. The League of Cities and Towns represents your interests. There are meetings every single Monday during the legislative session, and there are members of every community at those meetings, and they can express their interests. And the League listens, and you've got an army behind you. If this valley has an interest or a concern, and that concern is to the citizens of this valley, the League will take that to the legislature. So that's another resource that's available to you. Very quickly, yes.
Pine View Reservoir is owned by the Forest Service, and it's the heart, the dead center in our city. It's big. So there's a relationship, but if you know anything about that kind of relationship with a big agency of the federal government, what do you know about that?
So I appreciate that, because the biggest agency of the federal government in the state sits in Layton City, right? The Air Force Base. Yeah. And this I know, that the government does not try to tell Layton City how to run its zoning and planning around the base. However, that land which they own, they will set up a committee that will interface with the city, that will actually allow the city to have input on anything that happens on it or around the base that would affect the city. And so that's the way we work together. I've never had the federal government force anything down the city's neck. In Utah in 30 years, I haven't done that. In other words, they've not allowed a developer to come in and develop on a piece of federal land. The only exception to that, and I don't call it forcing it down their throat, but the MIDA projects that you've got up in Park City for the military base, and around Camp Williams, and up west of the base, Falcon Hill. But those are properties that are owned by the federal government. So the federal government works very, very well with you, and to have federal land in your incorporation I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Can I just follow on that question and ask, several of the legislatures have asked me, would you like Pine View to be a state? What would be the advantages and disadvantages of that in the middle of our city?
Well, and I'm just talking off the top of my head here, because I haven't done the research on your question, Mark, but I know this, that neither the state nor the federal government have to abide by your land use plans, right? I mean, they can build anything they want. The property around the base, much of it is owned by the state. And the state coordinates just as carefully with us as a local community as the federal government does. So I don't see a problem there. The only issue that I have ever seen between cities and the state is when it's UEN land, when it's a trust land. I've seen sometimes that trust land, if you happen to have trust land within your jurisdiction, I've seen, because the trust is based on creating money or funds for the education system, they will sell a lease to a builder and allow the builder to build whatever they want on that property, and really have very little concern for the local jurisdiction that happens to be in. And what St. George has fought that issue, Brantsville has fought that issue. But that's a different state agency altogether. They have a different goal. But just the state of Utah, I've not noticed very much of a difference between the two. And we have them both. In Layton, we have them both. And for 30 years, we've not had an issue.
Just a quick follow-up as well on that, Gary. Would you take a second, just talk about how the federal lobby opportunity can work, particularly as it relates to working with your congressional delegation, either mainly with your elected officials at the municipal level. Sometimes that includes federal lobbyists present, sometimes it doesn't. But just talk a little bit about that.
And a lot of the lobbyists are connected to federal lobbyists. A lot of your state lobbyists are. So if you get a state lobbyist that is connected with a federal lobbyist, you'll get a lot of, and West Valley did that quite a bit, is my understanding. In addition to that, Morgan City, I wanted to tell you, over the last, since 2017, has obtained about $8 million in grants. And $2 million of that came from Representative Moore. And so there's a connection between your federal delegation and your municipal officials when you have an entity, when you have a city. And Ty Bailey, who's the city manager for Morgan, and the mayor of Morgan approached Representative Moore. They got $2 million. They finished the bridge. There's a bridge that was collapsing in bad shape over the Weaver River, and they got $2 million for that. So there is a relationship, and there are needs sometimes to be able to get those federal dollars. And that's another thing, externality that you need to examine as to whether or not they're federal dollars that might help you, even around the lake. There are probably federal dollars if you wanted to improve things around the lake that you wouldn't have access to if you're on a state level. And then again, there are state dollars that are available for things like I'm talking about, you know, when you talk about the flyover and the connecting up the dams and that type of thing. So you'll have to weigh that out, but those are resources that are available to you that aren't right now. Those are not available to you right now.
So I guess I have a question. I don't understand where that money is coming from, but if I'm hearing you correctly, you explain the process, but we're also talking about West Valley, which I don't know how big that community is, obviously bigger than this one. Taylorville, huge, and they're not second homeowners there. So a lot of people don't live here. So that seems like that's going to affect, and that the area that was incorporated in all those areas, it fits the town, right? Like the incorporation here is 6 square miles, if I'm hearing that correctly, and it can't be built on. So how can that sustain itself? Like I don't quite understand that. And then where is the money going to come from if they don't have the amount of people living here and providing for taxes?
So I think there's a separate conversation as to whether or not it works tax-wise. And I agree with you. It has to work tax-wise. In fact, the analysis has to come out. That's the other reason I stress some of these communities that I told you about that have incorporated, like Hideout, Ruby's Inn, Liberty, you know, those entities that have incorporated. They're small, like Morgan's small actually, and they are second homeowners. You have to make sure that the community is represented. The internal item that I was telling you about up front, if you can't support an internal item, you know, if you can't get people that really want to see a theme, Springdale's another one. It's on
You mentioned, I'm sorry to interrupt, but a couple of those areas aren't working. You had mentioned Hideout. Can you touch on that?
Yeah,
Hideout. Is that a whole other? Why is you went to not working?
Hideout's starting to work, but you had to get what ended up happening in Hideout was the developers at that time were allowed to be mayor, and their family was allowed to be. That doesn't work. If you do that up here, I'm sorry, you're done. Unless
So just to clarify kind of where you're going, and I'm not sure if the lady was here as you were beginning to talk about hideout if you were, but your reference to there was really more along the lines of politically working, not financially working.
Yes, yes.
Right, has hideout been fine from a,
Financially, Hideout's healthy. They have the money. In fact, because of the special district, the developer actually has the money. That's the problem. That's part of the problem there.
Going back to Morgan with the second homeowners you observed are there, how does that work for Morgan?
You know, Morgan doesn't have a lot of second homeowners. There yet. Yes, exactly right. They're planning for that, but the interesting thing is there's a core of people in the city. The mayor has been there for 30 years. Tony on the council has been there for 30 years. He's been there as long as I have. So there is consistency on the council and with the government, with the local government. If you get a city that is all secondary homeowners and you don't have anybody that wants to run for mayor except the developer, that's when I'm saying you probably got a problem. And I think we all can see that you've got to find individuals who would be willing to do what Springdale does. That is to make sure that they represent the community and what the community wants to see as far as the way the community looks and the way the community develops. Park City is the best example of secondary homes. They got, you know, so many secondary homes out there and they're multi-million dollar secondary. Different situation probably, but not that much. I mean, there's a lot of, you watch this area in the next few years, you're going to have a Park City type situation where you've got large homes and developers coming in. And that's the reason you want to make sure you've got people in here who want to run, who want to serve, who can provide you with the theme that you've selected up here. It's beautiful. As I come through here, I go, there's a theme in this valley. There really is. And every new business that comes in seems to develop that theme even further. You want to keep that going. So,
But I think you're asking about the financial capabilities of this community running itself, correct?
That, and then obviously, you made a good point, who's gonna, I mean, granted, not all of us are gonna agree, right? It's getting people who are gonna run, right? And who are gonna agree. And we're also, not all of us in retirement, we can run in office. I mean, those are concerns.
and you don't all have to agree.
Yeah.
I've never seen a council all agree. If you find one, I want to work for that city. So.
But if you want to understand the financial aspects of it, just stay after and I can explain that.
That has to work. You're right about that. That has to work.
This is
So,
another relationship question.
Sorry?
We have, I was just looking at the census yesterday, and it looks like we have about 40% what they call unoccupied homes. So these are second homes, rental homes, various things like that. And in my neighborhood, at least, a lot of those people, maybe 2/3 of those people live on the other side of Wasatch Front. These are Utahns out there. Do they have an interest in what happens up here? They can't vote, but in terms of all this lobbying and so on, what they're caring about is when they come up here, it stays nice.
yes,
Is there a relationship or an opportunity there for us?
there is, and it's at a local level, and they have public input on the decisions that are made. A good example, I have 2 properties up in Garden City. And we have a ton of us that go up there all the time. If I am interested in a water issue, or if I'm interested in an issue that affects my property, I'll be to that meeting. But the individuals who sit as council members are members of that community. And, you know, they're the ones that make the laws, pass the ordinances, make the ultimate decisions. And it's that steady core that makes the community, I think, viable, and through the years, it makes it grow the way you want it to grow. That's a great question. Yes, they do have input through the public process. Probably more than they might have, you know, if it was just the county. And I'm not diminishing the county. They've got a lot of area to take care of, but when you're dealing with the folks that actually live here, then it's a whole different ballgame.
I was just going to say to the financial viability, those second homeowners do pay the full assessed rate on their property instead of the discounted property tax. So a full-time resident has a 45% reduction in their property taxes versus a secondary homeowner pays 100% assessment, and landowners pay 100% assessment. Another piece on the community is that the study that was completed couldn't include transient room taxes. So Huntsville Town has added that to their legislation, that basically you can charge a 1% transient room tax on all nightly rentals, and they get to keep that 100% in the town. That's something the community would be able to do. That is not included in the study presently. And then really you've seen a huge amount of people step forward on just like the different committees that we have, volunteering. You have the 6 sponsors that have stepped up. So I think community-wise, there's a lot of people involved and very interested in this. Full-time residents.
Excellent points. I have a handout too, with these external resources that are available to you that you can, phone numbers, League of Cities and Towns. Wasatch Front Regional Council is another one that provides money, provides city management even to a degree. They've got a city manager, loan city manager program that they run with the league. And they've got transportation funding, they've got grants. They're another entity, but I'll hand that out, or you can grab one before you go. Other external helps.
You've been talking mostly about the topic. Go ahead.
Oh, this gentleman's going to waiting, sorry.
Follow up on that financial business. It sounds like that you did not see the presentation on the LRB study in the governor's office. And that the other foundation, that was kind of pressing not being incorporated, but they also did a study. And once you erased the option of no growth, which that came up the station 22 years ago, what they had to agree that the studies, both theirs and theirs, really indicated that it was very feasible, the incorporation. I'm sure when you go to talk to Nick, he'll expand on that. There's been a lot of spade work on that analysis study so far. It's really solid.
Thank you. So summary, concluding, I'll take the question in a second, but number one is don't be afraid to use those external resources that are available to you. Some are free, some you have to pay for, but this valley, it is a worthwhile investment. It really is a worthwhile investment to do that. And as a group, as a town or as a city. And then the second thing is get yourself a core group of individuals who would love and have a passion for running, and I think you guys will take off and you won't be mountain green 40 years from now. I won't be around 40 years from now, but maybe 10 years when the Olympics are on. Yeah, you guys will be up and running by then. So, one more question.
The question is, you were talking mostly at levels of senators and government at high level. But we have, as far as I can count, something like 10 or 15 agencies they all have their own world, I know. But everything from DWR with a big chunk of Middle Fork to, just UDOT that has 2 major roads going through a community. So when you're at that level, not the higher level, but the level where people are actually kind of taking care of the roads in the wildlife management area, what should we expect in a relationship with them?
So that's the interesting thing about Wasatch Front Regional Council is that they are a coordinating agency for a lot of what you just mentioned. With UDOT, they coordinate the loans, the grants, everything with UDOT. And so that everybody doesn't develop their own little piece of property with roads that go through it and don't ever connect up to the freeway, that type of thing. So Wasatch Front Regional Council is one of your best resources. DWR, I don't know what the connection is there, but I know that as far as the Weaver River goes, that Morgan has a relationship with somebody at the office of DWR that actually coordinates with Morgan whenever we decide to do a trout, the trout traps and that type of thing. So as a city, it changes things. You're no longer just individuals calling up on the phone saying, hey, I need this, you know, because they'll put you down on the list and that list will get longer and longer. But when you become a city, they respond to the mayor, they respond to the council people that call, or the city manager if you happen to have one. So it changes life for you, is what it will do in that regard.
One more. You haven't mentioned the county either. And that goes to a city, the county would become an external function.
Yes.
So I know you can contract services from the county. Can you talk more about other aspects, what the relationship, or maybe from your experience with Morgan County?
Yes. Morgan's a little different than Weber.
Different county.
Yeah, different county, because Weber has a municipal type service district where they divide their services up and they charge individually to jurisdictions. For example, sheriff charges a specific fee for a specific town. Morgan doesn't have that set up that way. And so we pay the same thing everybody else in the county pays. And we pay for any additional services that we want. Like, for example, if we want additional coverage on our businesses, we'll pay an extra 10,000 a year for the additional services. So what you do is you develop a relationship with the county. A lot of it will be by interlocal agreement. I talk a little bit about that in my handout, but your interlocals with the county will be critical because those will dictate how you deal with the county. And you'll know upfront how you deal with the county. You'll know, you know, what it's contract. Yeah, very good. They're contracts, and you work them out. Council approves them. County council approves them, and that's the way you deal with the county is by contract. I hope there's coordination too in the planning, because there is in Morgan, you know, where they're on our borders. There's some things that they're very careful to make sure that urban development takes place in Morgan. Of course, they don't have much choice because they don't have water and sewer to provide. And that's really where it should take place, is in a municipality or that's where urban services should be provided, not the county. The county's not built for that.
So you mentioned at first of your presentation that these cities that are incorporated, if they hadn't incorporated, they would remain small. It sounded like you're saying if when they do incorporate, look at the growth they have. They're so much better. When I think our position is we want to put a cap on it, or not a cap, or a limit to how the growth is. And you made it sound like, yeah, Mountain Green is missing out because they're not a big city.
I'm sorry if I lent that impression, because that's not what was meant. What I mean is that you'll develop the way you feel that you should develop.
That's
For
what I wanted to hear.
Springdale, they haven't grown into a big city, you know, but they're incorporated. They have a voice up at the legislature. They want to remain small. You've got cities on the outside of that are trying to grow and trying to develop, but some of the other cities, I'm trying to think of some of the others that have remained small. What I was saying about Mountain Green is that there are things that they could have done to probably get an off-ramp there, a legitimate off-ramp there, which would have helped a lot with just the growth around that particular area, but it didn't. And then the county took over developing everything and is taking forever you don't know what you're going to get yet up in Mountain Green. You really don't. And you can control that. That's all I'm saying.
But wouldn't you agree, once you're a city, then you have to abide by city laws? And then the governor has more control and will say the amount of homes that need to be built that are affordable. So there's a whole other aspect that has to be in place in your city.
Yeah. Great point. So, yes.
To develop.
Yes. The governor, however, he can only say he says, we want 35,000 homes in so many years. The governor has no say on how many go in your city. The legislature is the one that makes the rules and is reaching down into the city's rights right now. And if we don't continue to fight up there every single year to make sure that the minimum densities in your area here are not 6,000 square foot lots, then nobody's going to fight for that, and it's going to become law. And all of a sudden, you're going to see higher density is not a bad thing, as long as it's in the right place, right? It needs to be located in the right place, but higher density in areas where, you know, that you want them to remain open, and you need to fight for that. If you don't fight for that, if you don't lobby for that, you're going to lose it. And right now, the counties don't depend on the counties to lobby for you up there. They do not lobby for cities up there. If it's not the cities and towns that lobby, you don't get any lobbying, because the counties are just concerned about the rural aspects of things. There are exceptions. Ogden and Salt Lake, you know, are a little more concerned about urban, but not as much as you will be if you're a city. Not nearly as much. So.
And you kind of got to the point I wanted to get a little more clarification on, but by what you're talking about as far as the county's relationship or responsibility in that area, we're really already under that responsibility. It's just instead of us as a city having influence or some level of control of that, the county is responsible for that same influence or control by the governor's office and or the state, right? As far as housing or development requirement.
Right, like there's a medium density housing plan that needs to be implemented in all master plans. Cities each have one, right? And you choose what areas you're going to use to promote housing, moderate income. And they check on that every year. Small communities, a little less stringent. But right now, the county's making that decision for you in their master plan. So they've got to have, there's about 19 to 21 things that you have to have in your master plan. You can choose 3. I think it's 5 now. I can't remember. There's a certain number that you have to have in your master plan. Counties are big, so they have to have probably close to 11, 12 of those in there. And they're deciding what those are right now. And they could be lower, smaller lots. They could be, but they have to develop those over a period of years. And the state now is monitoring that on a year-to-year basis. And I saw an article yesterday that talked about the fact that cities, be careful what you put in that, because in the next 5 years, you're going to have, if you put low income, small lot development, promote that. The state is going to, they have a police force up there, is what I call it, but a department up there that enforces that. And in the next 5 years, you're going to have to implement that, which means your master plan is going to become mandatory, which is going to be right now the county's master plan. Do any of you know what's in there as far as that goes?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know what I mean?
Once those decisions are made by the county, if that happens to a foreign corporation, are they grandfathered in, or can you back some of that stuff out?
It becomes your responsibility to build a master plan or a general plan, and it replaces the county plan.
So you actually can reverse it?
Yeah.
Your jurisdiction is not grandfathered in then?
No. Well, not unless, if the property's already zoned, you know, for something, you can't just go around and change the zoning for properties, but the master plan is something that you'll develop it yourself. You'll do a master plan for this area. That's
so the
another
county's master plan that includes us right now would not impact our master plan that we did.
correct.
Wow.
It's your master plan. And that's another thing Wasatch Front is really good at putting together for you. Is they paid, I think Morgan, we paid $200,000 for our general plan, but they take you through a process. You have groups, but they pay for that. The state will pay for that, so.
So we already have a general fund. The county just seems to selectively use that. But what I hear you saying is that these housing density things, these moderate income housing things are gonna be imposed on us either way. And so for us to have better control over what happens, we need to have a seat at the table in the legislature, which we don't have. We're just relying on the county to do the lobbying. And what I hear you saying is they're just not, they don't care as much as we would care as our own community. Is that, I understand that right?
That's exactly right. UAC is not, Wayne will tell you, UAC is not power to be reckoned with on the Hill when it comes to municipal rights, municipal, protecting municipalities.
Can you say that louder again?
UAC, Utah Association of Counties, is not, they're much smaller than the league. They don't have as big a voice at the table, and their voice tends to be oriented towards southern Utah, the rural areas, which is right. I mean, the counties ought to be taking care of rural areas, but cities should be taking care of urban areas. That's what you need. You need a seat at the table as a city, rather than saying, county, represent us up there, will you, please? Because it doesn't happen. So. Okay, I'm glad I'm retired because I probably won't get a job with any county.
You can have these handouts, I'll just stick them on the back chair and they just outline the resources that are available to you.